When you met him 10 years ago, he was convicted of soliciting prostitution. It was reported that you continued to meet with him over several years. What did you do when you found out about his background?
Well, he's dead. So, in general, you always have to be careful.
What you're about to hear is not a Twitter gossip item, nor some random rumor from a dark internet forum. For a long time, people have been talking about the Jeffrey Epstein files, begging the US government to finally release them so that we can know whose names are on them. Jeffrey Epstein was a US financier who met and knew many powerful people from all over the world, and who became notorious to the rest of us mere mortals because he had a network of child abuse. In 2019, he was arrested on sex trafficking charges involving these charges on the minors, and that same year he died in prison. And well, in recent years, and especially given everything that also happened with Diddy in the past few years, everyone who was associated with him in any way, including the current president Donald Trump, have become extremely suspicious, to say the least. Some of these things proving right, and some of them just being based on speculation so far. But what is interesting and finally taking place is the fact that some things are finally being released to the public, and what you're going to be seeing today is utterly mind-blowing. There are emails attributed to Jeffrey Epstein, and to the surprise of some, though at this point I feel like to the surprise of not that many, also to Bill Gates, who has been a very controversial figure in the past few years, to say the least. These are emails that have been leaked from the US Department of Justice, and what is described in them is downright repugnant, so brace yourself. If any of this is even minimally true, and we'll also be taking a look at what Bill Gates has said about this, then we will be looking at one of the most disgusting episodes ever linked to Bill Gates. Because from Jeffrey Epstein, let's be real, like most people didn't really have any faith left, at least I hope so. But in Bill Gates, even though some people had lost it a while ago, some others still thought of him as this like philanthropic and highly charitable man. But let's keep in mind that Bill Gates, as well as other powerful men, among them magnates, politicians, academics, celebrities, you name them, have been associated with Jeffrey Epstein for the longest time, and Jeffrey Epstein functioned as a sort of social and financial intermediary, or at least that's how he presented himself in these circles. He promised contacts, access to certain exclusive circles, cultivated very specific relationships, and projected high status through money, donations, events, and of course his contacts. It's kind of like that old saying that it's not what you know, but rather who you know, and that your network is ultimately based on the people that you know rather than how much money you have in the bank. This network therefore gave him social capital as well as plenty of leverage. The bigger the number of important people he had in his address book, and the more important they were, the more of an opportunity and possibility he had to open doors for himself and for others. It is documented that Epstein was first arrested in 2008 for sex crimes, but it was not until 2019 when he was finally arrested for sex trafficking. And it was also in that year when he died in prison. And many people have been saying that it wasn't just him taking his life, like they officially said, but that there were possibly other forces. I've also even seen theories as to whether he even died to begin with. Since there are photos of Epstein with absolutely any sort of famous and influential person, ranging from magnates, businessmen, celebrities, actors, singers, politicians, even royalty, some people have been debating whether we can officially think that anyone who associated with him and was in his island, went to his parties, were in their pictures, was associated with him in the sense that they knew what was going on, or even to the extent that they were involved in this network of abuse. Kind of similar to the whole Diddy situation. When everything came out, people started saying that anyone who was in images with him or that attended his white parties must have also been a part of what actually went down. And of course, we don't actually know to what extent all these people were associated with him in these images and these events, but it is of course very suspicious and does not look good on them whatsoever. And in recent months, the US Department of Justice has been releasing images and documents with still lots of names crossed out, supposedly with the intention of protecting the victims. And it is important to state that even if a name does appear in this list, or even if we see an image, it does not necessarily imply a crime, only an association at that time. And this is where Bill Gates comes in. Bill Gates and Jeffrey Epstein seem to have had a quite close relationship that lasted anywhere from 6 to 7 years. It seems that Bill Gates went to the islands quite a few times, that flew in his plane quite a few times, even though he currently acts as if they were never that close to begin with. However, Melinda Gates, Bill Gates' ex-wife and the person with whom he created the Melinda and Bill Gates Foundation, has actually cited Bill's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein as part of the motivation for her divorce from her husband or ex-husband. So they likely did have a relationship that was closer than Bill likes to admit, because of course the horrible price that this would have on his reputation, and is already having actually. But after years of this close relationship, they started to have a very interesting falling out, and to leave record of what was going on, Epstein started to send himself emails that had very interesting things, to say the least, and of course we'll be taking a look at them in brief. But what is interesting in these emails is that they don't really seem to have been, maybe acquaintances that saw each other a couple of times and took a couple of photos because they ran in like maybe somewhat similar circles, but rather these emails indicated favors, money, and trusting each other with lots and lots of dirty secrets. And when the relationship starts to fall apart is when Epstein does not hesitate to write. And what he writes is absolutely bonkers. Let's take a look.
Dear Bill, I cannot believe that you have chosen to disregard our friendship, developed over the last 6 years. I am aware that accidents happen. It is how each of us has chosen to deal with this unfortunate event that has me dismayed beyond comprehension. You have decided to discharge me from my job. You had Larry, your PR person, tell me that I engaged in morally inappropriate behavior. He asked me to be the major actor in a cover-up so that you can maintain the reputation that you have worked so hard to achieve. You asked me to recommit to a confidentiality agreement and have categorically told me that we cannot have any direct, ongoing business relationship. This is in total disregard for its impact on the public perception of my reputation. I will have to diligently avoid the truth. I will have to tell people that Bill will not invest with me and craft an answer that suits your needs. You did agree to send a letter of recommendation should a future employer ask for one. You have told me that Melinda insists on me not communicating with you unless Larry is copied or present, though you have consistently maintained that I could not have done a better job and that I was underpaid compared to my contribution. You then, beyond all sense of fairness and frankly decency, said that as generous compensation for keeping the Gates reputation intact, you would let me keep what we agreed I had already owned, the investment pieces, and give me 2 years severance, similar to Christine Turner, another casualty. If the shoe was on the other foot, I would have said, this is not your fault. I confessed to Melinda. It was in a moment of weakness, and I will do anything within my power to make it right for you. I have more money than anyone needs. I will bend over backwards to make sure your next career is rewarding and on an upswing. That is what I would have done had I been in your shoes. What I did receive, however, was an unfriendly, strongly worded email, and that I should not look to you for any significant financial help in the future. To add insult to the injury, you then implore me to please delete the emails regarding your STD, your request that I provide you antibiotics that you can surreptitiously give to Melinda, and the description of your penis. You also made it clear to me that I am not to refer to redacted, as that is another topic that must remain between the two of us. All of these requests, which I would have done without a second thought, until you were ready to discard me and our friendship.
Well, as we've heard, according to Epstein, Bill had been sleeping with Russian escorts, and after doing so, he had contracted an STD. And that's not even the darkest part, because let's keep in mind that Bill was still married to Melinda at this time. And what comes next is the part that absolutely crosses any sort of moral boundary, if there was ever one to begin with. And it's the fact that Epstein, who had claimed to be a doctor but who couldn't legally prescribe at the time, had been asked by Bill Gates to prescribe drugs, in this case antibiotics, to his wife Melinda, without, of course, her consent. She wasn't aware that her husband was having extramarital sex with escorts. To be honest, I kind of doubt that part. I do think she was probably, aware of all this, but she probably didn't know the extent of it, and she sure as hell didn't know that he had contracted an STD. And that's the part that's like insane. He was actually asking not only to give her antibiotics without her knowing that she was taking antibiotics, but also without her even knowing that she had an STD, without her even knowing that her husband was up to this. It's all absolutely insane. I guess he just made her think that she was taking vitamins. And again, I don't really know the dynamics of the relationship. I do believe they had some sort of open agreement or whatever, but clearly it wasn't all that open if he wasn't able to comfortably be like, maybe not comfortably, this kind of thing would never be comfortable probably, but be like, hey, I actually kind of caught this and maybe you should take this or whatever it was. It seems like Melinda had a lot more boundaries than she may have led up to believe. But she did know that her husband was friends with Epstein, so she must have known at the very least that sketchy things were happening. I don't know to the extent of them, but I think she must have known that stuff was happening. And of course, giving absolutely anything to anyone without their consent is extremely problematic and crosses any sort of moral boundary. However, there are degrees to it. You know, it's not the same giving someone, say, a vitamin C without them knowing, like if they're sick and you're like, hey, you know, take this and this and that. I'm not saying do that, of course. I think you should always inform people like this is a vitamin C or this is X supplements. Like, I don't think you should be feeding anyone anything without them knowing about it. But of course, it's not the same to do that than to give someone a full-out antibiotic, because you don't know how that person is going to react to them. You don't know if they have an allergy to that specific antibiotic. There are plenty of other symptoms that can also come from not taking them correctly, you know, or maybe taking the wrong one for you, whether stomach issues, diarrhea, nausea, and also the fact that you can't take alcohol. You can't be drinking alcohol with most antibiotics to begin with. So maybe Melinda didn't know anything was up, so she was just like drinking every day or whatever it was, or getting drunk occasionally, as she had to take these antibiotics, which would have made them not function as well. There can also be plenty of other interactions with taking antibiotics and other drugs, without talking about the fact that when you are finished with a course of antibiotics, and any of you who have taken them, you probably know that your gut flora is like completely messed up and other symptoms come from that. So she was probably like, what's going on that I'm having all these crazy symptoms, and didn't actually know why. But this is such a recurring pattern that we see with people that have power and wealth at this level, and Fitzgerald was so good at actually writing about this in his books. And it's the fact that they think that they're absolutely above any sort of law. And sometimes they do end up seeming that way. I mean, they end up getting away with things that the rest of us could never. And I'm not even talking just about like law and order, as in like the police and trials and prison. I'm not even talking about that, but also just any sort of like divine or moral order, if you will. Epstein also claimed in other emails that Bill Gates asked him to get rid of any emails or any conversations that were pointing out to the fact that he had asked them for these antibiotics for Melinda without her knowing about them, talking about the STD, you know, to delete any sort of record that could leave any information about the STD or his relationship with these Russian women, or even also descriptions about his male member. All of it had to disappear, and all of it had to be buried, because the priority never was and has never been with these kind of people truth, justice, none of that. In this case, it was always Bill Gates' reputation, which is something that they admit that Bill had worked so hard to maintain. And while Bill Gates' reputation has changed quite a bit in the past few years, but at some point I remember him being known as like the nicest billionaire, as a kind and charitable and philanthropic billionaire, unlike the other greedy and overly ambitious ones who only thought about themselves. He was known as someone who donated a lot of money to charities, especially via the Melinda and Bill Gates Foundation, and he always did these kind of things very publicly in order to build up this reputation. Little did we know what was going on behind the scenes, as is the case with most of these people. And then of course, we also see the classic pattern in these stories. Epstein claims that in exchange for money, multi-million-dollar investments, and future financial and general stability, he had committed to protecting Bill Gates' public image. But as often happens, once Epstein stopped being useful, they decided that it was time to get rid of him completely. They dropped him and told him in a very cold and legalistic email to not expect any sort of financial help in the future. But of course, keep protecting us, keep quiet, and even lie in our name if necessary. Then in another email, Epstein claims that he was ready to abandon any role or any job that he still had left in the Melinda and Bill Gates Foundation. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, if you're not aware, is one of the largest philanthropic foundations all over the world, with top missions including reducing poverty and improving world health, especially in developing countries. And they had Epstein, apparently, of all people, working in this organization until he said, this is it, my role here, my job here has been finished. Also in that email, Epstein claims to have been asked to take part in actions that were morally repugnant, ethically indefensible, and potentially illegal. Imagine Epstein, of all people at that moment, playing that victim role or complaining that he was being pressured to do all these things. Someone who had absolutely zero notion of morality or cared about the legal repercussions of absolutely anything. Among these actions, he includes facilitating sexual encounters, not only with escorts, but also with married women. And of course, the part about getting medication for Gates' wife without her consent or even knowledge about it. So it really seems like Epstein was at this point presenting himself as somebody who knew too much and whom they wanted to get rid of. And the worst part of all of this is that Epstein, by this time, had already been convicted of sex crimes. All of this had first taken place in 2008, but even after this, Gates had continued to meet up with him. They didn't catch Epstein again until 2019 when he was finally convicted of sex trafficking. So if Bill and other people were still hanging out with him during this time, I don't know to what extent they can be like, oh, I didn't really know what was going on. I really feel like they, of course, must have known the kind of people that they were associating with, and it really makes me wonder if they weren't the similar kind. You know, birds of the same flock fly together. Actually, it's birds of the same feather flock together, but you got the message. But as always, once the castle was starting to wobble, and we're seeing the same thing nowadays with everything that's being released, the priority stopped being, or was never to begin with, the victims or justice or the truth or being a good ethical person and bringing about what's fair, but rather protecting their own reputation at any cost. And to top things off, another leaked email suggests that Epstein and Bill Gates were actually planning a pandemic simulation in around 2017, which was 3 years before the infamous pandemic that we actually did go through and that we'd rather forget. This email presents certain proposed outcomes, including a simulation of strain pandemics, health data systems, and neurotechnology linked to national security. This is all very curious, of course, coming from Bill Gates out of all people, given that he played a very interesting role when we did finally have our pandemic, which at this point, who knows what actually happened there. Let's all remember that through the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Bill Gates funded vaccine production and research. He promoted COVAX, the international mechanism to buy and distribute vaccines, especially in developing countries, and publicly advocated for global access and cooperation during the pandemic. All of this very, very interesting, as well as, of course, having been extremely pro-vaccine. So let everyone draw their own conclusions. So let nobody be mistaken. None of these are facts that have been proven in court, but they are emails that have been leaked from the Department of Justice. They are not cheap things that have been invented by artificial intelligence and then leaked online, but again, things that have been directly leaked from the Department of Justice. Whether they have been proved or not, that's another story, because Bill Gates, of course, has come out saying that they're all ridiculous and absolutely untrue. A spokesperson for Bill Gates has come out saying that these things are not only untrue, but completely absurd, and it's not even clear whether these emails were sent to or from Bill in the first place, because in the to and from area we just see Epstein's name. It could have been that he was sending them to himself, who knows. And they said that this just keeps adding to that public scrutiny of the relationship between Epstein and Bill Gates, a relationship which Bill Gates once again has really downplayed and also called a major mistake, but that was also a pushing factor in the divorce between his wife and him. What is surprising nobody at this point is the fact that the elite, as we've always expected, but now we're finally seeing it in real time, have always been able to do as they please, to have been above any sort of law, like we're saying, whether it's law and order or any sort of moral or divine law, if you will. They get to, by silence, delete any sort of information that could condone them, and also, many times, turn absolutely disgraceful situations that they've been involved in into unfortunate accidents. And reaching this point, nothing is settled, nothing is definitive, lots of things remain to be seen, but they're all very, very interesting to say the least, and I think we should be drawing some conclusions from the things that are being leaked to the public. So I'd like to know what you think about all of this that we've been sharing today, whether you think that it's all too far-fetched, that we have absolutely no proof and shouldn't be talking about any of this in the first place, or if there's something there. If there's something there that is pointing to, even if it's the tiniest stream of light at this point in this very dark situation. So I'll be reading your comments. If you like this video, make sure to share it with someone who might like it, subscribe, give me your likes, and I'll see you very soon.